drastic measures. President Donald Trump makes a dramatic announcement about the fight to defeat the coronavirus in the United States. We're at the White House. Helping Hands. A distillery in Pennsylvania takes an unusual step to participate in the battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. A man of faith. On the Feast of St. Joseph, Pope Francis tells us how we can be like Christ's Father on earth. And keeping the faith. Advice on how to treat the weeks before Easter during the pandemic. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, March 19th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight, while the world battles the coronavirus, doctors and scientists are working around the clock on new medicines. The head of the Food and Drug Administration calls it encouraging. He joined President Donald Trump at today's coronavirus task force briefing. And we have team coverage tonight. Eric Rosales is on Capitol Hill with an update on aid bills aimed at helping those hit financially by the virus. But we start now with Owen Jensen at the White House, where the coronavirus task force spoke again today. Owen.
Well, as Americans practice social distancing, the White House is trying to get treatments to market faster.
At the White House coronavirus task force briefing, the main focus on this day, treating the illness that has slammed the globe, including drugs, therapies, and vaccines.
I want every American to know that we're doing everything we can, and these actions are important next steps. I mean, for the FDA to act the way they acted with this kind of speed is an incredible thing.
As the world remains hunkered down, waiting to see what happens next, the Food and Drug Administration says it has scientists and doctors working around the clock.
We are looking at everything that's coming across our desks as possible treatment options for coronavirus.
Dr. Stephen Hahn says he's extremely encouraged by the innovation he's seeing, and he's committed to safe products.
We need to make sure that the sea of new treatments will get the right drug to the right patient at the right dosage at the right time.
Meanwhile, on the front lines of the battle.
This is a war. Treat it like a war.
New York's governor worries about hospitals being overwhelmed.
You can't buy a ventilator right now. Globally, you can't buy them. We're going to have to make them or make something like them. And that's why the federal government stepping up and ordering the manufacturers to now come together and make this happen is going to be imperative.
At the same time, pleas to young adults to take the outbreak seriously.
Get off the beach. I mean, unless you can figure out how to completely be isolated from anybody else, take some personal responsibility here. Don't infect other people. Don't take a chance that you're going to be the one that's going to cause your grandparent or your parents or another friend from school to get sick.
In Afghanistan, the U.S. military is quarantining 1,500 troops who recently arrived there to avoid any spread of the coronavirus. As for the battle against the virus, President Trump calls it a medical war.
There's never been anything like this in history. There's never been. Nobody's ever seen anything like this.
And he offered these words of encouragement.
We'll be back, and I actually think we'll be back stronger than ever before.
One drug is called remdesivir, the other chloroquine, a malaria drug. They're also working on a vaccine. Tracy?
Okay, Owen, thank you. Correspondent Owen Jensen reporting from the White House tonight. As millions of Americans have seen their lives upended by measures to curb the spread of the coronavirus, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are working on even more aid bills to help those hurt financially by the virus. Correspondent Eric Rosales continues our team coverage from Capitol Hill. Eric?
Well, Tracy, we're all waiting right now. In a matter of days, Congress is set to unveil a massive economic relief bill. Now, this bill is supposed to help Americans avoid foreclosures, who are not receiving a paycheck, and even help businesses who are possibly going into bankruptcy.
We're at war. Let's go to a wartime footing against the virus.
Republicans and Democrats alike are calling for extraordinary measures.
Our goal is to make sure that no one, no worker, no family, no one loses a paycheck or goes into financial ruin as a result of the coronavirus. And that will take strong, bold, immediate action.
The minority leader urging cooperation.
That's why we must work so quickly, but carefully as well, to put together a bipartisan package.
In a document obtained by EWTN, the U.S. Treasury details the $1 trillion proposal. It includes $50 billion in loans to the airline industry, $150 billion more for affected industries like hotels and cruises, and $500 billion in checks to taxpayers.
Every American is a soldier in this war against the virus. How do you kill the enemy? You deny human contact. So we're basically going to pay people to stay at home. We're going to pay people to contain the virus.
Those checks will be dispersed in 2 rounds, the first half beginning April 6th and the second half beginning May 18th. Senator Graham tells me now is the time for prayer.
Your faith underpins your family life. It underpins America. Rely upon it. God never sends things our way that we can't deal with if we look to Him.
Senators tell EWTN that they will remain in session until this third economic stimulus bill will be passed. There is growing concern, though, from some senators about the coronavirus taking place here on Capitol Hill. They are asking some of the lawmakers to even consider voting remotely. We'll stay on top of that issue. Tracy.
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill. Thank you, Eric. The only woman left in the Democratic race for president has ended her campaign. Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard is offering her support to former Vice President Joe Biden. She made the announcement by email earlier today. The 38-year-old Iraq War veteran, originally from American Samoa, is the first Hindu to run for president. She broke from the other Democratic candidates in opposing late-term abortions. Gabbard also angered Democrats by voting present on the Trump impeachment articles. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing growing accusations that he is exploiting the coronavirus pandemic.
הממשלה תאשר הלילה תקנות לשעת חירום שיאפשרו שימוש
He wants to use phone tracking tactics to find out who has been in contact with those infected with the disease. Israel has used the technology to track Palestinian militants in the past, but now Netanyahu explains he wants to use cell phone records to identify the moments and movements of coronavirus patients. Israel has at least 277 cases of COVID-19. The 60 million people in Italy remain on lockdown as the death toll in that country surpasses 3,000, passing China's reported death toll. Italian police are helping healthcare workers to perform coronavirus tests on patients. Italian newspapers report the government is studying whether or not to extend the quarantine to wait for the number of cases to decrease, knowing that normal life will not be able to bounce back so quickly. Daniel Arsa, Dean of Church Communications at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross, or Santa Croce, joins us now from Rome via Skype. Thanks for joining us, Daniel.
It's a pleasure to greet you from Rome.
So tell us, how can working from home be both beneficial and also harmful for professors as well as students?
Well, this is a situation that we didn't expect, so we have to arrange ourselves and try to accommodate to the situation. As soon as we knew that we had to spend our time at home, the university invited the professors and suggested all of us to continue the classes online. And this is what we have been doing, and keeping in touch with our students and following the same schedule as always, but just online and in a digital fashion.
As an expert in church communications, what is the church's responsibility and the correct response in facing global problems?
Well, let me say first that I think the best answer that the church is giving these days is the example and the activities that the different ordinary faithful Christians in their homes are giving. There are lots of online initiatives with prayer, online rosaries, following the Pope, the Mass of the Pope every day. This is spreading around through the social media. I think at the same time, the church has given a very good answer, responding to the request of the authorities, encouraging everybody to stay at home, and at the same time, keeping in touch with all the faithful, and sending messages of hope and support. And I think the answer is very good. This is not just a church issue, it's a society issue, so everybody has to be involved in that.
Yeah. Obviously, you're in quarantine, and I'm curious how your personal experience has been during this time.
Well, I have to say that this is a surreal situation, because being in Rome, a city so much full of people and tourists and pilgrims during the whole year. And now seeing the streets of Rome empty and spending the time at home is kind of strange. But at the same time, we have to accommodate and accept the situation. We know that this is a temporal situation, so again, we are using the time in a different way. Yeah. At the same time, we are dedicating more time to the prayer, to the study, and also to doing leisure activities, not that reading, watching some movies. So I think that we are coping with the situation very well. I have to say that the situation is much worse in the north of Italy, where the focus of the coronavirus is much bigger than here in the center and in the south.
Yeah, definitely a difficult time for everyone. The Holy Cross University was gearing up for a seminar on inspiring trust in today's culture. Can you give us an update on that and why you decided to choose trust as the focus?
Well, as you can understand, in the last, let's say, years, the church has been put into a big tension, with other sexual abuse scandals and other kinds of situations in the church and in society. And we thought it was a good moment to reflect and to think, now that this thing has happened, what the church can do to rebuild that trust. So we decided to put together people from the world of church communications together to reflect on that issue. Unfortunately, we have to postpone and move the seminar to the next year because of the coronavirus situation that we didn't accept, which is, in fact, another crisis. So I'm sure that next year we'll have also to talk about that in the seminar.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Daniel Arsa, Dean of Church Communications at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross. Thank you again.
Thank you so much to you all.
Well, there's not supposed to be mass gatherings because of the coronavirus pandemic, but in Indonesia, thousands turned out today to see the ordination of a new Catholic bishop. About 4,000 attended the ordination mass this morning. It was held for new Bishop Cyprianus Hormat. Organizers say it was too late to cancel and 7,000 people originally wanted to go. Outside the cathedral, people used hand sanitizer and lined up to get their temperature checked. Elsewhere in Indonesia, a mass gathering of 9,000 Muslims has been canceled, and authorities have started to quarantine them. The event was supposed to go on for the next 4 days, but it was not approved by the government. It was organized by a Muslim missionary group that held a similar gathering in Malaysia, which has been linked to hundreds of coronavirus cases in several countries. Coming up, an update on the efforts to defend religious freedom during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how a distillery in Pennsylvania is trying to raise people's spirits in the fight against the coronavirus. The coronavirus pandemic in Iran forced the regime to release 85,000 prisoners on temporary leave, and an American Navy vet is one of them. Michael White is now in the custody of the Swiss embassy, but he cannot leave Iran. He spent the last year in prison. His family says that he has cancer and his immune system is weak. White was sentenced to 10 years for insulting the supreme leader while he was visiting his girlfriend. The spread of the coronavirus has prompted governments around the world to implement measures that in many cases have never been seen before in order to try and control the pandemic. But at what cost to religious freedom? A bipartisan federal commission in the U.S. is keeping a close watch to make sure this fundamental human right is preserved. Joining me now by Skype is Gayle Manchin, Vice Chair of USCIRF, the United States Commission on the International Religious Freedom. Welcome back to the show, Gayle. Good to see you.
Well, it's so good to be back with you. I'm sorry that we're under these circumstances. This is a global crisis.
Yeah, it is very, very concerning, Gayle. Well, as we've seen, governments around the world are imposing restrictions in the name of protecting public health. And of course, that's understandable. But what impact does that have on religious freedom?
Well, as commissioners, we always try to encourage our countries around the world to work with their religious faiths, to work with the different religious groups. That is much better for their country. And it usually ends up in providing a much safer quality of life for everyone, where you find, like in the country of Kuwait, their own religious clergy are asking people to stay home. In some areas, they are issuing a fatwa, just asking the religious faiths to remain at home or to close their mosque. In a few countries, the UAE, they are actually mandating that children not come to church. And all of these are understandable. But then you have a situation where there is no cooperation. For example, in China, where they have arrested 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslims and have put them in a concentration camp. Can you imagine the horrific outcome if the coronavirus started working through one of those camps? Another example, South Korea, which is sort of being touted as a good model to follow, actually, though, has been harassing one of the churches, Shancheonji, actually wanting to arrest the religious leader for negligent homicide, blaming this church or this faith for the coronavirus. So where you find that governments and their religious groups within their country do not work together, you find the outcomes are much worse.
Yeah, Gayle, how do you think governments should balance this public health concern and then also the protection of religious liberty during this time?
Well, I think it certainly, as with in all of our countries, it becomes a balance in how you do it. Anytime a country needs to preserve order for the safety of its people, that's certainly understandable. You just monitor to make sure that they are protecting all of the people and that they're not discriminating against a particular faith using the crisis as an excuse. And the way you monitor that is obviously, hopefully sooner rather than later, this pandemic will pass. And then to see that those restrictions are lifted. You know, that's the main thing. Once these restrictions are put in for a temporary period of time, those countries understand that USCIRF will continue to monitor to make sure that they are lifted and the rights of people to go back to attending their church, practicing their faith to their conscience, will go back to a normalcy for all of the faiths within their country.
Well, Gayle, thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it. Stay safe and healthy. Gayle Manchin, Vice Chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Thanks again, Gayle.
Well, and if I could just say, you know, what we are so proud to be able to do, whether it's in a time of calm or in a time of pandemic as it is now, that we continue to be a voice for those that do not have a voice. And I think that gives hope around the world that we will be speaking for them when they can't, before, during, and after a crisis such as this. So thank you so much for bringing the awareness to that.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Gayle. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, hand sanitizer isn't the easiest thing to get right now. We all know that, and chances are your local store is probably sold out. But believe it or not, you can make it yourself as long as you have one key ingredient: alcohol. Lucky for one small business in Pennsylvania, they have plenty of it, and now they're using it to help those in need. Eight Oaks Distilleries in eastern Pennsylvania, like everywhere, was about to shut down and wait out the pandemic. Then its owner, Chad Butters, an Army vet and husband to a cancer survivor, saw another need for the main ingredient in hand sanitizer: alcohol.
So what we're doing today is we have shifted focus from making beverage alcohol products and put 100% of our resources towards making hand sanitizer for our community.
The local cancer support group needed it, so did hospitals, emergency services, nearby towns, and businesses that had to keep working.
We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. As we went through this process of, just like everybody is, trying to deal with this situation with coronavirus and everything that's going on around the world right now, you try to gauge what it is that is the right thing to do and what's the right reaction.
So appalled at reports of hoarding and price gouging, Eight Oaks stopped making vodka, gin, and bourbon and cranked up the sanitizer.
So we have the plant equipment, the processes, and the people, and frankly, the distribution system to a local degree to produce this product and get it out to people that are in need of it. There's clearly a need.
Just hours after hatching the plan, the first batch only a few hundred bottles. The requests way more than they can fill. They were in desperate need for even more bottles.
So we can scale this up 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times this size. We have all the ingredients and alcohol needed to produce it.
Butters expects to churn out 10,000 bottles a week. Not only is he keeping his 25 employees working, but if it turns out right, he'll be hiring. One business, one community in rural Pennsylvania coming together in a time of need. Butters says he doesn't want to profit off of his sanitizer. In fact, he is giving it away for free. He's only asking for donations. Up next, one priest tells us how the faithful can remain spiritually connected amid the coronavirus pandemic. And an iconic statue of Christ looked a little different yesterday. We'll explain. During this time of social distancing, the question of how to grow closer to God is one the faithful are dealing with daily, especially with the suspension of public masses. Father Thomas Petrie, moral theologian and professor at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington, D.C., and co-host of the Church Alive Saturday mornings on EWTN Radio, joins me now. Father, welcome back. So great to see you.
Great to be here, Tracy, although I wish I were able to be in studio with you.
I know, I do too, but social distancing, as we just mentioned. First, I do want to start off by asking you, how are you doing right now?
Well, you know, this is also a difficult time for priests. As you know, every diocese in the United States has suspended public celebration of the Mass, but the very reason priests exist is to bring the sacraments to the faithful. So prudence, of course, dictates that we try to eliminate any possibility of spreading this virus, this very contagious virus, for the next couple of weeks. So it's a little difficult for priests, but we're continuing to say Mass. We're continuing to pray for the faithful, continuing to bring them to the Lord in our prayer.
Yeah, and a lot of people are really expressing, you know, this deep sense of sadness and loss of not being able to be, you know, really present, physically present for Mass. What are your suggestions on how to cope with that?
Well, I would say two things. First is to realize that Masses are still being said, and the Mass is the way that our Lord Jesus Christ intends for the graces of his cross, his suffering, death, and resurrection to filter, to be poured into the world. So those graces are still coming into the world. You're benefiting from them. I'm benefiting from them. Everybody's benefiting from them. But secondly, about that longing that people rightly have to receive communion, I would really just encourage people to make an act of spiritual communion, which is to say, to pray to the Lord to come into their hearts, to come into your heart spiritually. When we receive the Eucharist, the sacramental Holy Communion, the whole point of sacramental communion is spiritual communion. We are embodying creatures. We need tangible and physical things. So the Eucharist is supposed to bring us into spiritual communion. But we can still get spiritual communion if we're intentional, if we're pious, if we're devout, even without receiving sacramental communion. It's not ideal. We want to have both sacramental communion and spiritual communion, but we can have spiritual communion without sacramental communion. Pray for it, ask for it daily whenever you feel that longing.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. What about confession? Can that take place during this time when, you know, social distancing is so crucial?
Well, it has to be done in a very creative way. And there are priests all over the country setting up chairs in parking lots where people can drive up, roll down their window. I saw a picture of a priest here in the Archdiocese of Washington who actually had a blindfold so that you could go anonymously. You would drive up, he'd pull the blindfold down. I think this is one of the things Pope Francis has challenged priests around the world to do. Even though we can't have public celebration of the Mass, that doesn't mean that priests are on vacation, doesn't mean that we're locked up in our rectories and our priories and monasteries, figuring out ways creatively to bring the sacraments to the people, confession, anointing of the sick, even bringing communion outside of the Mass, outside of the church to the faithful. I'm very grateful to my brother priests who are doing all of this.
Absolutely. And you know, this has really changed life for so many of us in so many different ways. I know you personally had to cut your pilgrimage to the Holy Land short because of COVID-19. That must have been really hard.
It was. I had made a personal pilgrimage to the Holy Land last week. It was my first time. I was alone. I had rented a car. I had this beautiful drive up the Jordan Valley to Mount Tabor, to the mountain where our Lord was transfigured. And when I came down the mountain of Tabor, I looked at my phone and there were all of these text messages. You've got to come home. You've got to get out. So I was right there at the fork in the road. I either took a left to go on to the Sea of Galilee or to take a right to go back to Jerusalem and pack my things. And my guardian angel had a real sense I needed to come home. And thankfully I did. I arrived home just under the wire of President Trump's deadline for travel restrictions.
Well, we're glad that you're back home and that you're safe, and we know that you'll go back again. So thank you for all that you do, and thanks for being on.
Thank you so much, Tracy.
And remember, since you can't get to Mass, you can always watch our daily Masses right here on EWTN. Mass is broadcast each day at 8 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. Eastern. EWTN is also airing the Pope's daily Mass as well as the novena from Our Lady of Lourdes. So spread the word to your family and friends. For more airing times, visit EWTN.com. One of the world's most famous statues dedicated to Christ was lit up last night to honor the victims of the coronavirus. The statue of Christ the Redeemer in Brazil was illuminated last night with the flags and maps of countries affected by the deadly COVID-19 outbreak. The Archbishop of Rio de Janeiro was among those who participated in the ceremony. The Brazilian landmark usually only is displayed with white lights. One of the hashtags flashed onto the statue was "Praying Together." And finally, tonight on the feast day of St. Joseph, Pope Francis praises his example.
La preghiera di adorazione soltanto può darsi quando si entra nel mistero di Dio.
At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father asked the faithful to enter into the mystery of God's love and his plan for us. And he used St. Joseph as an example of someone who lived in faith. He says St. Joseph not only spoke to God every day, he also dedicated his work to God. Pope Francis invites the faithful to do the same. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.